The idea of a Russia-India-China strategic triangle dates back to the 1990s, as India and Russia sought new partners after the Cold War and the USSR's collapse. In 1998, Russian PM Yevgeny Primakov famously proposed a strategic triangle with India and China to counterbalance US dominance. Primakov's vision was to pivot Russia's foreign policy eastward, rebuilding ties with India and forging a partnership with China as a counterbalance to the Western alliance. At the time, however, Beijing and New Delhi were wary. Chinese officials insisted on a non-aligned policy, and India feared a Moscow-Beijing axis would constrain its sovereignty. Primakov's New Axis initiative received a cold response from India and China, who saw it as anti-Western. Nonetheless, the RIC idea lingered. In 2001-2002, the three countries began formal trilateral talks. The first foreign ministers' meeting was convened in 2002, with India often crediting 2001 as its start. An Indian embassy press release notes that by December 2017, the RIC framework was working very effectively as a platform for open discussion on economic, security, and regional issues. Through the 2000s and 2010s, RIC ministers met periodically, often on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly or global summits, to discuss topics from trade and development to terrorism and climate change. By 2016, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, was calling the RIC an effective and sought-after format. The tripartite was never deeply institutionalized, however. Russian analysts describe it as a flexible trilateral dialogue mechanism rather than a formal alliance. Indeed, the RIC has no permanent secretariat and acts more like a diplomatic club than a tightly coordinated bloc. Still, leaders occasionally convened. At the G20 Osaka summit in July 2019, Presidents Putin, Modi, and Xi held a trilateral meeting, the last full summit of RIC leaders to date. Earlier, the three had an informal summit at the 2018 G20 in Buenos Aires. Foreign ministers met. China's foreign ministry similarly has stated that it is willing to maintain communication with Russia and India to advance trilateral cooperation for a regional stability. India's own Ministry of External Affairs describes the RIC simply as a consultative mechanism where three countries come and discuss global and regional issues. During the Cold War, India pursued non-alignment but maintained especially close ties with the Soviet Union, which supplied much of its military hardware. After 1991, India diversified, but Russia remained a key partner. Throughout the 1990s, Russia sought new friends to escape US influence. Primakov envisioned India and China as natural partners. Delhi, however, was cautious. Indian analysts at the time worried that an explicit RIC bloc would limit India's autonomy. China reacted strongly to any hint of a tripod that might seem designed to contain it. Thus, the early RIC concept mostly remained a diplomatic idea rather than a robust alliance. In practice, the RIC evolved through its foreign ministerial talks. For example, a 2017 RIC meeting in New Delhi, the 15th such meeting, reaffirmed the forum's scope across economic development, counterterrorism, and regional issues. A joint communique hailed the RIC as an effective platform for consultation. Russia publicly treated the RIC as a pillar of its Asia pivot. Lavrov later noted that Russia sees the RIC dialogue as mutually beneficial, and official statements highlighted the format's role in creating an equal and indivisible security architecture in Asia. Yet, analysts note that China and India never fully embraced it as a binding alliance. The Russian view has been that the RIC must not be framed purely as anti-Western. As one Russian think tank put it, trilateral cooperation should not emphasize counterbalancing the West. In the 2010s, the RIC countries had generally cordial relations. India signed major defense deals with Russia and cautiously engaged China economically, even as its security concerns about China grew. However, external developments complicated the picture. By the late 2010s, India was deepening ties with the US and its allies, which created an ideological tension with the RIC's implicit multipolar narrative. Indeed, as the diplomat noted in 2020, India's burgeoning partnership with the US, Japan, and Australia conflicts with the RIC's goals of seeking to undermine Washington's role in the Indo-Pacific. US support on key issues became important to India, putting more distance between New Delhi and the traditional RIC worldview. In short, India continued to value its special friendship with Russia but grew wary of any anti-American tilt in the RIC, especially as China's rise loomed ever larger in India's strategic calculus. The COVID-19 pandemic and renewed India-China tensions severely disrupted RIC activity. In mid-2020, bloody skirmishes in the Galwan Valley killed Indian and Chinese soldiers. The clash led to a serious freeze in India-China relations. Diplomatic pundits noted that the 2020 border clash effectively froze relations between India and China and sidelined the RIC dialogue. All planned RIC meetings were put on hold. India, mindful of Chinese aggressions at places like Doklam and Ladakh, became highly skeptical of China's intentions. An expert in early 2020 argued that China's recent hostility makes it difficult to see how engagements through platforms such as RIC are going to alter the basic conflictual nature of India-China relations. During the border crisis, Russia played an effective mediator role. Moscow convened multiple rounds of India-China talks and even offered to host a summit, underscoring its influence within the RIC. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov urged a revitalization of the RIC troika once India-China tensions eased. In fact, by late 2024, Lavrov noted the moment arrived to start RIC dialogue after India and China had partially de-escalated. Meanwhile, Russia continued its separate annual RIC summit with India, the 2024 Indo-Russian Summit in July 2024. And even tried to organize separate India-China talks. These actions showed Moscow's desire to keep all channels open, even though India remained uneasy about China. In October 2021, India and China agreed to withdraw some troops in Ladakh, helping to partially cool the standoff. This relative thaw allowed some economic and diplomatic ties to stabilize. By 2024, bilateral trade had rebounded, reaching about US dollars 138.5 billion, and both sides talked of partial thaw in relations. However, strategic distrust endured. India refused to put the China-Pakistan alliance too far and continued to strengthen its American and regional partnerships. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 reshuffled global alignments with complex effects on the RIC. India took a cautious neutral stance. It abstained on UN votes condemning Russia and greatly expanded its purchase of Russian oil and gas. In 2022 to 2024, India's crude imports from Russia surged to around 40% of its total oil imports. This energy lifeline helped Western sanctions have less bite, and it underscored India's continuing strategic partnership with Moscow. India also continued large Russian defense deals, receiving S-400 batteries in 2023 and signing new naval contracts, for example. In return, Russia refrained from penalizing India for its neutrality. As a result, Russia-India ties actually deepened in 2022 to 2024. At their summit in 2024, Putin confirmed Russia's highest civilian honor, the Order of St. Andrew, on PM Modi, praising the resilience of the special and privileged partnership. At the same time, Russia drew closer to China. Cut off from the West, Moscow urgently needed markets and technology. China stepped in to fill the gap. In 2023 to 24, Russia and China dramatically increased military and economic cooperation. They held record numbers of joint military exercises. In 2024 alone, they conducted 11 joint drills, their highest ever, spanning sensitive areas from the South China Sea to the Arctic. Meanwhile, China invested in Russia's energy sector and became a key supplier of components to Russia's defense industry. Chinese purchases of Russian oil and coal boomed despite Western sanctions, and their two-way trade reached about $245 billion in 2024, a record high. The depth of the Sino-Russian partnership is now described by analysts as nearing a de facto alliance. Putin himself lauded the partnership as without a doubt at an unprecedented level. Beijing has reciprocated, with public statements affirming mutual interests. Chinese diplomats say that RIC cooperation aligns with the respective interests of the three countries and even contributes to world peace and stability. These shifts have strained the RIC balance. Russia's turn to the east inevitably placed China at its side, making Moscow less attentive to India. Indeed, Indian officials grumbled that Russia would not sell India out for China, but also noted that in practice, Moscow often prioritized Beijing's concerns. For example, in 2019, Russia refrained from fully backing India on Kashmir at the UN. Diplomatically, India was also left out of some of the Russia-led Asia discussions at China's behest. Meanwhile, Russian actions under sanctions have pushed it closer to China's orbit. Throughout these changes, New Delhi's foreign policy has been a delicate balancing act. India has worked to maintain its strategic autonomy by engaging all sides. On one hand, India has continued its deep, pragmatic partnership with Moscow. Russia remains India's largest arms supplier by far, supplying roughly 36% of Indian arms imports from 2020 to 2024. Over the past 2 decades, India bought about $60 billion of Russian weapons, about 65% of its total imports. These include cutting-edge systems that India considers vital. In 2023, it accepted delivery of 3 Russian S-400 air defense regiments, with 2 more expected by 2025. India is also building 4 guided missile frigates with Russian help, and has leased a nuclear submarine from Russia, and co-produces the BrahMos cruise missile under a joint venture. In short, India's defense planning, especially against China, remains heavily invested in Russian technology. At the same time, India is increasingly entwined with Western security networks. Since the mid-2010s, New Delhi has elevated its partnership with the US and allied democracies. It hosts US troops for military exercises, joined the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue with the US, Japan and Australia, and signed a series of US arms deals. India has also taken a more active role in global fora to counter Chinese influence. As the diplomat observed in 2020, India found itself increasingly under stress to choose between Russia or China and the West, even as it nominally claimed non-alignment. India's leaders argue that they want neither a Western bloc nor an anti-Western one, preferring to work with all sides. For example, Indian spokespeople describe the RIC as one of many consultative platforms alongside the BRICS and the SCO, through which New Delhi can advance its interests. India's multilateral approach reflects this hedging. India is a founding member of the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, while simultaneously active in the Quad. In practice, India treats each forum differently. The BRICS is seen largely as an economic club. At the 2024 and 2025 BRICS summits, India pushed an agenda of shared economic development, high growth, and a fight against terrorism, and has been cautious about advocating extreme anti-dollar measures that China favors. Delhi is even wary of letting the BRICS expand too much, and pays close attention to Chinese and Russian initiatives within the BRICS. For instance, India ensured that BRICS communiques retain tough language on terrorism despite China's likely objection. In the SCO, which includes Pakistan and its allies, India likewise insists on mentioning Kashmiri terrorists in joint statements. When one 2024 SCO meeting dropped any reference to a recent Kashmir attack, India refused to endorse the communique. And India even distanced itself from an SCO statement condemning Israeli strikes on Iran, signaling that it will not simply parrot a unified Global South line. Conversely, the Quad is an explicitly security-focused bloc with the US, and India has fully embraced Quad dialogues as a counterweight to China. Just before the 2025 BRICS summit, Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar attended a Quad foreign ministers meeting in Washington, underscoring New Delhi's commitment to that grouping. Thus, Indian diplomacy flips between the BRICS and SCO on one side and the Quad and Western ties on the other. As a Chatham House analysis noted in mid-2025, attending back-to-back Quad and BRICS summits demonstrates the agility but also the strain of India's balancing act. For Moscow, the RIC is part of the grand multipolar vision. Russia consistently argues that the three-way dialogue should expand to counter US hegemony. As Lavrov has publicly said, the RIC Troika meetings provide Moscow a platform to advance and secure its national interests in a changing world. Russian officials note that the RIC was established many years ago on the initiative of Primakov and emphasize its track record of nearly 24 ministerial meetings. Russian strategy documents urge China and India to work together in RIC for a stable Asia-Pacific order. In 2024-25, with Moscow under strain from sanctions and Western unfairness, Russia has repeatedly pushed to revive the RIC format. As RIC Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko said in mid-2025, we are interested in making this format work because these three countries are important partners. In short, Russia sees continued trilateral cooperation as a diplomatic tool and as an affirmation of its own regional pivot. China officially views the RIC more pragmatically. It supports dialogue, but it is not ideologically wedded to countering the West through it. In response to Russian calls, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that Beijing is willing to maintain communication with India and Russia in the RIC, and that such cooperation aligns with the respective interests of the three countries. China's main concern is ensuring that India does not join a US-led containment strategy against it. For example, observers note that Beijing may see revived RIC talks as a way to engage India directly and reassure New Delhi that the RIC is not about anti-Chinese blocs. However, Chinese diplomats have also made clear that they oppose any narrative that Russia's interest equals China's interests. A Russian analysis cites a 2014 Chinese statement that Russia should not assume that silence from China is an agreement and should avoid forcing China to pick between Russia and the West. In practice, since 2022, Beijing has been careful to emphasize that its support to Russia is justice and fairness rather than a flat endorsement, again signaling pragmatism. Overall, China is content with deeper bilateral ties with Russia, especially in tech and energy, and does not depend heavily on the RIC for new policies, but remains cooperative in the dialogue. New Delhi takes a cautious, transactional view of the RIC. Indian leaders have repeatedly stated that India will engage the RIC on its own terms. A Foreign Ministry spokesman, Randir Jaiswal, put it in 2025, the RIC is simply a mechanism where the three countries come and discuss global and regional issues. Any decision on resuming talks would be taken in a mutually convenient manner. In practice, India has not enthusiastically pushed for a new RIC summit. The 2020 Sochi Foreign Ministers meeting was held, but afterwards India let the RIC lapse as its focus shifted to the US partnership and its own border issues. Only recently, in mid-2025, has India signaled openness to reviving RIC dialogue, partly as a hedge against perceived Western double standards. For instance, frustration over possible US threats of sanctions for buying Russian oil. Still, India insists that the RIC will not come at the cost of its US ties. In July 2025, Prime Minister Modi emphasized that India remains committed to the Quad and other partnerships, even while exploring RIC revival. India's caution reflects the floor and ceiling of its ties with Russia. While India will not dump Russia, in part because Moscow supports India on many global issues, it won't also let the RIC dictate India's choices. Indian analysts note that New Delhi values the RIC as one of many platforms, but it will not allow any alliance to compromise its strategic autonomy. In effect, India's stake in the RIC is to keep a foot in Eurasia without blindsiding the West. For now, India treats the RIC as an interesting dialogue, a way to talk to Beijing and Moscow, but not as a bloc. As an Indian columnist quipped in 2017, the RIC statements can even be sidestepped. When India was the host of an RIC foreign minister meeting in 2017, New Delhi simply omitted any mention of controversial topics from the communique. The Russia-India-China strategic triangle remains an evolving, fragile construct. Its history reflects shifting power balances, born of late Cold War Russian outreach, partially adopted by India, and always contingent on Delhi's equidistance. Over time, China and Russia have drawn close militarily and economically, while India has become a swing power in Asia. The post-2020 era has tested RIC. Border wars and a European war have driven wedges between India and China and pulled Russia towards China. Yet all three capitals still see utility in the format. Russia wants the RIC revived as a sign of multipolar solidarity. China is open to dialogue to avoid further alienating India. And India, though ambivalent, sees the RIC as one among multiple lanes in its multi-aligned strategy. As one current analysis notes, India is increasingly out of sync with other global South countries, even its fellow RIC partners, due to differences over issues like security and foreign policy priorities. This complicates any trilateral unity. If the RIC is to continue, its survival likely depends on whether each country can accommodate the other's core interests. For Russia, that means using the RIC to sustain ties with India, even as it cozies up to China. For China, it means engaging India without expecting unqualified support. For India, it means extracting economic and political benefits from RIC discussions while keeping strategic autonomy intact. The coming years will tell whether the RIC remains a talk shop or becomes a more meaningful force. Diplomatic schedules suggest cautious renewal. Russian and Chinese officials have recently approached India about restarting the RIC dialogue. But any new meeting will be a delicate dance. As one analyst put it, the trope of a tripod is still realpolitik. India will recalibrate only as much as it gains, balancing cheap Russian oil and defense support against its Western commitments. In this strategic triangle, each corner holds its own agenda. For general audiences today, the RIC is best understood not as a fixed bloc, but as a journey of high-stakes diplomacy, where history, national ambitions, and shifting alliances continually redraw the map.